Hello everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make this Dracula wall hanger. He's part of a new set that I've designed for Halloween. This includes last video's Frankenstein, but there are more on the way, so please subscribe and stay tuned for more. Okay, let's get into the video. Okay, so for this tutorial, you'll want white, red, black and grey yarn. You'll want a hook, some scissors and a needle. Okay, so to begin, you'll want to take your black yarn, create a slip knot, put your hook through and chain 22. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So there is our chain of 22. So now what you want to do is go into the back loop of the second chain from hook for a double crochet. So finding that back loop, put your hook in for a double crochet. And you'll want to do this all the way along, going into the back loops until you have 21 double crochet in total. So yarn over, going through, yarning over again, pulling through 2, pulling through 2. So continue that all the way along until you have your 21 double crochet, and I'll meet you back then. Okay, so I finished my row. I've now got 21 double crochets. What you want to do now is chain 1, turn your work and go back in to every stitch along for another double crochet. So going into the stitch, so repeating that down until you've got another row of 21 double crochets. And you'll want to repeat this until you have 4 rows in total of double crochet. So going into every stitch along for a double crochet, chaining 1, turning and repeating. And once you've got those 4 rows of double crochet, I'll meet you back for the next part. Okay, so I've reached the end of my 4 rows of double crochet. What you want to do now is chain 1, turn your work, go into the first 4 stitches for a double crochet, 2, 3, full. Now go into the next stitch and pull through the 2. Now don't pull through the last 2 loops, because what you're going to do now is take your grey, pull your grey through, yarn over, go into the next stitch for a double crochet, go into the next stitch and only pull through 2, and then we're going to pick up our black again and pull through those last 2 loops, and then we're going to go into the next 6 with the black. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, go into the 7th and only pull through 2, and then we're picking up our grey again, and pulling through those last 2, and you don't want to pull too tightly or the back will make your work curl. Now go into the next stitch with the grey, go into the next stitch and only pull through 2, pick up your black again, pull through those last 2, and then we're just going to go into the last stitches along that row with the black. Okay, so when you reach the end, what you want to do is chain 1, turn your work, and go into the first 3 stitches with a double crochet. Into that 4th stitch, go in but only pull through the 2, and you want to make sure now that you're dropping your yarn on the same side. So you don't want to drop your yarn behind this time, because otherwise you're going to end up with these on the front of your work and you don't want that. So make sure you're dropping it to the front. Pick up your grey, pull through those 2 stitches, and you want to make sure you're going into that last black stitch with the grey for a double crochet, going into those 2 stitches there, and then into that next stitch, but only going through 2, dropping that yarn to the front, picking up your black, pulling through those 2 stitches, going into that next stitch, and then going into the next 3 stitches, going into that second to last black stitch, dropping your black yarn to the front, picking up your grey, pulling through those last 2, going into that last black stitch, into the next 2, into the next black stitch, but only pulling through 2 stitches, dropping the yarn to the front, picking up your black, pulling through those 2 stitches, and then going into the last stitches with the black. So that's the end of that row. Okay, so at the end of that row, what you want to do is chain 1, turn your work, go into the first 2 stitches with your black for a double crochet, into that next stitch, but only pull through the first two stitches. We're dropping the yarn behind this time, picking up our grey. This can get a bit fiddly. Pulling through those 2 loops, going into the next stitch, then going across the next 4 stitches, going into the next stitch, but only pulling through the first 2, dropping that yarn behind, picking up our black, pull through those 2 stitches, go into the next 2, and then into the next 1, but only pulling through the first 2 loops, dropping the yarn behind, picking up our grey again, pulling through those last 2 loops, going into the next stitch, going into the next 4, and then going into the next stitch, but only pulling through the first 2 loops, dropping our yarn behind, picking up our black again, then going into those last 2, and then going into the last with the black. So at the end of that row you want to chain 1 and turn, go into the first stitch and then into the next stitch, but only pull through the first 2, dropping the yarn in front, picking up our grey, pulling through those last 2 and then going into that next stitch, going across all of the grey, going into that next stitch, but only pulling through the first 2, dropping our yarn in front, picking up the black again and making sure you're not pulling too tight, pull through those last 2, going into that next stitch, but only pulling through the first 2, dropping that in front, picking up the grey, going through those last 2, going into that next stitch, going across all of the grey, and go into that next stitch, only pulling through the first 2, dropping that yarn in front, picking up our black again, going through those last 2, going into the next 2, and that's the end of that row. Chain 1, turn your work, and only through those first 2, drop the yarn behind, pick up the grey, pull through the last 2 and going in, and then we're just going to run all the way along until we reach that last 2 stitches with the grey. Right, we've reached the last 2 stitches. You're going to go into that second to last stitch and only pull through the first 2 loops. Drop your grey behind, pick up your black, making sure you're not pulling too tightly. Pulling through those last 2, you're going to go into the next stitch. Only pull through those last 2, dropping your yarn, picking up the grey, pull through those last 2, chain 1, turn your work, and we are now going to do 5 rows of just plain double crochet with the grey. So yarning over, and we're just going to continue that along until we have 5 rows of plain grey double crochet. So I'll meet you back once I've got my 5 rows of plain double crochet in the grey.